SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Africa is one of the most dynamic and diverse regions in the world, not just in its breathtaking landscapes, safari adventures and varying different terrains, but also economically, and especially for gambling. Welcome back to iGaming Daily. Today, we are kicking off our Road to Lisbon series, where we chat to key speakers and thought leaders ahead of SBC Summit in September about the panel topics shaping the conference. I'm Charlie Horner, and today I'm chatting to Christopher Coyne, co-founder and CEO of 888 Africa, which is currently targeting around half a dozen different markets. In part one of today's show, we'll unpack the continent's rapidly evolving gaming landscape, from the stark differences between markets to how operators can prioritise their entry strategies and localise effectively. Then after the break, we'll zoom in on two key countries making headlines: Kenya, with its surprising tax U-turns, and Malawi, a rising star attracting foreign attention with its bold moves. iGaming Daily is brought to you by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. Christopher, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for taking the time out. How are you doing?
Yeah. Delighted to be here today, Charlie. Thank you for inviting me. Not a problem
at all. I'm really eager to dig into this because you've got some really varied experiences in iGaming, and you're a great voice to have on to talk about Africa, because not only are you in your current role, at 888 Africa, but you also have worked in Europe and Australia earlier in your career. So I guess just to kick off, what are the big differences you notice working in the African markets compared to some of its European and Australian counterparts?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I draw a lot of commonality between Australia and the UK. Obviously, the UK is a very established market, a lot of big players at the top end of that market. Names like Bet365, Sky Bet, Paddy Power, Ladbrokes, William Hill, and others. Established market, good casino market, heavily regulated, heavily taxed, lots of policy in place for customer management, particularly on problem gambling, and player protection, and a through the line sort of go to market plan for brands and all the channels in play. So online, retail, social, the rest of it. I think Australia has a lot of that to speak to as well. Australia is not regulated for online casino, so it's regulated for land-based casino, and it has obviously the retail with venues. It has the retail with track sides for sports betting racing at the track, and obviously it's a very mature sports betting market. All of those things I spoke to before around player protection, problem gambler, regulated and taxed state by state. So a mature market and lots of policy and process in that market. If you think about Africa, it's completely different. Africa is 54 markets. Around about 30 of those have regulation for online. We're active in half a dozen, as you noted at the top of the piece, Charlie. Great continent in terms of its variety and spread. You're talking about more than 1 billion people on the continent. It's a continent that's got a constant population growth. One of the few areas of the world that continues to have quarter-on-quarter population growth almost everywhere, north, south, east, west. But it is a immature market in terms of iGaming. So the presence of venues and shops has been there variously around the country. And in the last sort of 10, 12 years, you've seen the adoption of online strongly in Africa. And that will continue as we move forward. But, to try to give you a reference point, it's like thinking about, I joined Paddy Power in 2008. It's like thinking about the UK and Ireland in online, probably even earlier than I was when I started in the company in Paddy Power. So probably even 5 years before that is how to think about Africa today. That doesn't mean that it's an unimaginative market. It's not to say that it's, kind of a bit slow. None of those things are true. It's just the conditions are very different. You're talking about, for lots of customers, dealing with handsets that are years and years old. So you've got to think about, the challenge of bandwidth. You've got to think about the challenge of messaging. You're dealing with lots of languages in Africa, lots of languages. Obviously, UK and Australia, predominantly one language. In Africa, tens of languages. Okay. And even within one language, there's variations of the same language, if that makes sense. So language is a challenge. Handsets and connectivity are challenges. So, for example, certain products like a live dealer from, an Evolution or a Playtech, that will only appeal to a fairly thin set of the market for the reasons I spoke to in terms of customer data and so on. So phone data, mobile data, and so on. Obviously, in the UK and Australia, pretty much most phones will take that kind of product quite well. But look, it's a continent that is becoming more economically viable. It is a continent that has more and more governments turning towards our sector. The need for raising tax revenue is material in Africa. And, you start to think about where can that be raised from, sugar, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, are kind of obvious categories. So more and more governments are turning towards regulation. With regulation comes opportunity. There is a grey market and a black market in Africa, but more and more countries are offering license regimes, taxable regimes. And it's a good thing for iGaming in Africa because more and more professional operators are moving in. And I think the more professional Africa can become because more quality operators have joined, the party, if you will, I think Africa will zoom from being UK and Ireland 2003 right now to being, a rapidly improving environment for iGaming in the next even 3 to 4 to 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can grow 10, 15 years in the next 3, 4, 5 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that there's plenty of opportunities there, not just because of the regulation, but because of other factors such as, growing economies, increased accessibility of mobile devices, etc. There are, of course, challenges, but overwhelmingly there is an opportunity. But I guess so far we've mentioned Africa as a whole, as a collective. And I guess in Europe, sometimes we do have a tendency to view Africa as one market, but like as you said earlier, it's 54 different countries. Presumably, there's plenty of major variations in terms of player demands, the technology that's available, and the wealth of the players. How do you decide on those half a dozen markets that 888 Africa is in, and what's your approach to different markets across the continent?
Absolutely. Look, I think in terms of supermarkets, so not I don't mean grocery. I mean in terms of super space markets, right? Supermarkets inside of Africa, you're probably looking at 3. Okay, so you have South Africa, which is the biggest market on the continent of Africa in terms of revenue and revenue potential. Behind South Africa, you have Nigeria, but again, huge opportunity, massive population in Nigeria, lots of competition, established retail, now online market, a lottery market as well. Okay, so lottery is a very big product across Africa, not everywhere, but in lots of markets. The opportunity of bet small, win big, buy a ticket, get a jackpot, life-changing thing, that's very prevalent and very real in Africa. So Nigeria is a great market. And then if you fast forward 5 years, the next market that I predict will become a giant on the African landscape is Egypt. I think Egypt could move to more regulation or proper regulation in the next while. And when it does, it's got huge revenue potential. So they're probably the 3 standout, and South, Nigeria, and then Egypt. On top of that, then you can think about splitting Africa. This is crude, Charlie. This is crude, but you can split Africa probably into 3 categories, right? You've got the French markets. Okay, so Ivory Coast, Senegal, as examples. You've got the English markets, where English is kind of the predominant first language. Let's think about those as being Zambia, okay, and let's say either Ghana or Tanzania, would be another good one to think about. And then you have the third category, which is only 2 markets, and that's the Portuguese states. So that's your Mozambique and your Angola, okay? We're market leader in Angola for size, so we're number 1 for market share in Angola. I think we recognize Elephant Bet as being market share leader in Angola. So start again. We're number 1 in Mozambique. Elephant Bet's number 1 in Angola. So they're the 2 Portuguese markets. So in and around all of that, you have Swahili as a language, which places in lots of markets, and you have other tongues as well, right? But they're the 3 broad brackets: the French markets, the English markets, or English first markets, let's say, and then the 2 Portuguese markets. They're the 3 ways to think about Africa. Plus, on top of that, you've got your Nigeria, your South Africa, and in time you'll have your Egypt as well. So look, I don't think, there's plenty of markets, Charlie, in Africa where, frankly speaking, iGaming is not likely to come. So if religion is a particular thing in the market, and it's very dominant religion in a market, it's unlikely that iGaming will come. There have been other markets that have had, should we say, difficult histories in more recent times. Markets like Somalia, which have been difficult. I don't think iGaming is a priority in those markets. So I don't think you'll ever really have 54 markets covered. I don't think you will. Certainly not in my lifetime. But I think a good, strong 30 plus markets out of 54, as we move forward the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think that's very realistic. Yeah, very realistic.
That's a really interesting overview, and the way that you 888 Africa sort of compartmentalized different markets. I'd love to just touch on, your go-to-market strategy. You mentioned that, you have number 1 positions in several of those markets. How do you approach entering those new markets? I don't want you to maybe divulge any secrets that might give away the secret formula, but is there anything that you tend to prioritize in terms of entering these markets and making sure that you're in tune with local players?
I mean, in all seriousness, Charlie, we literally have a checklist, literally. So we made a decision when we started. So effectively, we signed a deal. Myself and the co-founders signed a deal with Evoke. It was then 888 Holdings in March 2022. We made a soft launch in September 2022. Effectively, we went live proper from January 2023. So we've been live now in Africa proper about 2.5 years, right? We're in 6 markets, as you said. There's nothing stopping us being in 20 markets. Really, what you have to do is complete a license process, pay your license fee, be approved by the regulator, and set up operations. Like, we know how to do that, and we could easily do that in 20 markets, with some time and effort into application processes. We could easily do that and have 20 licensed markets. The reason we're in 6, Charlie, and not 20 is, for us, it's very, very important to think about what's our right to compete in this market. Okay. So why do we think we can establish a position? Why do we think we can get, strong revenues into a profitable bottom line in a reasonable time frame for us to make that market a priority? And when you put that lens on 20, 30 markets, you end up with 6 or 8 markets. Okay. So for us, the key thing is that we look at is the market stable? Okay. Does it have war? Does it have political unrest? Does it have any other environmental factor, a catastrophe, a disaster, a kind of a long-running issue that could knock it out for us in terms of its economic viability? We look for markets that are a certain population size. So anything sort of 20, 30, 40, 50 million in population size, we like that. If it's smaller than that, so if it's, below 20 million as a population, it becomes less interesting for us. Okay. So we're not interested in the super small markets in Africa by population. The next thing we look at is economic health. So is the economy of the market that we're looking at growing? Is it growing well? Does it have future potential in the near term? What's the penetration of mobile? Okay. Is it good and improving? Good. Okay. Then what we do is you say, okay, well, what are the conditions to operate under license in that market? So what's the tax regime? I'll give you, for instance, you mentioned Kenya. One of the reasons which we're less keen just in this phase to invest quite as hard in Kenya as we might have planned to, or as we have done in other periods, is because the tax regime has become very difficult. There's a proposal for a tax regime coming to Zambia that will make that market very difficult if it comes into play. We're currently lobbying with the government that doesn't happen. So we have to have the right tax conditions, okay? And listen, tax can change, and we understand all of that. But the licensing and tax regime is very important. Another thing that we look at is the competitive intensity. So let me give you an example. We look at Nigeria and we say, wow, there's tens and tens of brands fighting for a big prize, but there's so many brands in that market, Charlie. And why do we believe that we could compete against established operators, that have been there a long time, that have a customer base, that have brand resonance, that have operations on the ground? You need that in Nigeria. Why do we think we can compete? And so for those reasons, we haven't stepped to markets like Nigeria. We like markets that are 30 to 50 million of size in terms of population, growing, economy is decent, mobility is decent, and the competitive set is a thin enough set, okay, that we think, okay, that's a market we could penetrate quickly. And we come back to one overriding scoring point. We have an ambition and a mission inside 888 Africa to be podium position in every market where we operate. By podium position, we mean top 3 in every market that we operate, somewhere in a reasonable amount of time. So I would say 18 months to 24 months from when we put the market live, our ambition is to be podium. If we look back at the market and we say, do you know what? There's an established top 10 and we ain't going to penetrate that easily, in the next short window, then we'll put that market on the back burner. Okay, and we'll concentrate on the ones that we have. Look, Charlie, we have an organic strategy, which is what we're leading on now, but we have an inorganic vision as well. So we will be looking where we can't get podium of our own organically, we will be looking to make acquisitions that supercharge us up the rankings, if you will, in a given market and get us to podium in a different way. Where we fund that is the success of what we're doing in the organic. So success in the organic produces cash. We put that cash to inorganic, and the whole thing becomes about, through both of those routes, podium position everywhere that we are. Yeah.
Fascinating. Christopher, we'll take a very quick break and we'll come back and talk about 2 of those markets specifically.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily. I'm joined by Christopher Coyne, CEO and co-founder of 888 Africa. Before the break, we spoke about Africa as a whole and, how 888 Africa chooses its markets. Now we're going to talk about 2 markets specifically. First of all, we sort of alluded to it earlier and you mentioned about the tax regime, Christopher. I want to talk about Kenya and there are changes coming up to the tax regime in Kenya. Could you just give us an overview of what that is and why potentially you're not super keen on that particular regime?
Yeah, look, Kenya's been difficult for a while. Okay, so at the moment, what we're wrestling with in the last short period has been bans on activity. Okay, so I think the government has some concern about the proliferation of the aviator game, so the game from Spribe, which has sort of taken root all across Africa. It's a very quick, simple game to play. It's themed around a plane taking off and coming down, and you have to effectively bet on when the plane will come down, and you get an instant win. And this game's really taken root across Africa. So in more recent months in Kenya, the government's come forward and effectively put a ban on advertising. Okay, so we're not sure how long this ban is going to last, but there has been a ban on advertising for a period now in Kenya, and that really means anything digital, anything above the line, anything direct has been closed down. Can't really work with affiliates, can't really do the other marketing that you were doing in previous past times. For a period, there was also the grips on us in terms of CRM activity. So we couldn't really even speak to our existing acquired customers. Okay. The government has kind of brought this in on the back of some noise in the populace around too many people becoming too involved on a daily basis, weekly basis with the iGaming sector in Kenya, a perception of that or a read of that. And that's the government response. So
yeah, just to interrupt there, do you think is that a fair assessment, or is that something that you would reject?
Look, I think it's it's difficult, right? I don't live in Kenya. We spend a lot of time in Africa. I've been to Kenya several times, but I don't live in Kenya. So I think one can't dismiss some of the viewpoints that are being put forward, because guess what? They're coming from I guess reasonable people who are living in and around Kenya. So look, we can't dismiss people's views as they're presented, and we like to work with them. I think the best of the operators in Africa, I'm very involved with Betway, and I'm very involved with BetPower. I have to say, two very credible major operators for the African continent. And I think the three of us are all of the same view, that the more that we can do to bring the right level of policy and conditions to the market across Africa to make the experience safe, as safe as it can be, to make the experience for the customer, if you will, the more that we can do that, the better. If that forces all operators to raise their standards so that we don't have over-marketing, we don't have players getting very involved in a game or on a sport and losing too much money, that they don't have. If we can be part of a movement that brings more policy to Africa that is appropriate for Africa, and that makes the whole environment safer and more consistent for players, we would welcome that. I think I speak for Betway. I think I speak for BetPower. The three of us are in weekly meetings to speak about various topics, one of which is what we're speaking about here now. But Kenya's made this movement. In the previous past years, Kenya's brought a lot of tax to the market. I think their view was, look, this is a fast-growing sector. We'll tax it really hard. The operators will find a way. The whole thing will move forward and we'll have a healthy tax revenue. That hasn't proven to be the case. What's happened is overtaxing, taxing at too high a level in Kenya has meant that a whole bunch of operators have left the market, have done less marketing. So if you're an operator and you've got 10 markets and Kenya's to the left and others are to the right, and you've got a certain marketing budget to invest, if the conditions are too difficult in Kenya, you'll put your marketing dollars to other markets where the conditions are more favorable. So look, Kenya for sure has gone too far on taxing the operators. I think you're now left with a couple of very strong operators at the top of the market, Batika, Sporty, one or two others at the top end of the market. I think where that's going to head out is if Kenya really wants to get back into the kind of growth it was seeing in past periods and the kind of operator presence that it was seeing in past periods. There needs to be a complete tax regime review, and operators need to be involved. Charlie, this is the important point. Operators need to be involved in the conversations on taxation. So Zambia sort of jumped to try to follow where Kenya was in a period last year. However, that was stopped. There was some good conference between the operators and the authorities, and I was hoping that we were going to settle down and put a new plan in place for the next period. Just as we stand, there seems to be another rising of a difficult tax proposal, and we'll see how that goes. But look, I think there are markets where there's a decent relationship between operators and the authorities. I think Tanzania would be a good one. We work very well in Mozambique with the authorities there. And there are other examples across Africa where that partnership and communication between operators and regulators coming together to lay the land down, operators listening to the regulator and to the authority. What tax rate, what tax dollars, what number are you trying to raise? Let's think about how we can do that through the way that we impose taxation. We will work with authorities and regulators to deliver on their outcomes in terms of what tax they've got in the country's budget file for our sector. We will work with them, but imposing very high levels of tax on operators in markets without consultation tends to fail. So hopefully other markets can learn that the Kenya experience wasn't a great one, and they could do it differently in the future.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating and compelling argument there, Christopher. And it seems that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what the market, tax is going to be a big topic of contention, and no matter how big or small the opportunity is. So you mentioned that Kenya is proving somewhat challenging and problematic. Let's talk about another market. Hopefully this one is a little less problematic. I want to touch on Malawi. It's something that you've previously described as a new frontier in Africa. Could you just expand on that and outline the opportunity here just before we wrap up?
Yeah, look, Malawi is very interesting, right? Malawi is a market that we've been focused on, both in setup and then operation for probably 12 months now. It's a market that is lightish on competition. So the top end of the market in Malawi, you have Betway, very, very credible operator, brilliant operator, great management, great brand. And you have Premier Bet. I used to work at Premier Bet for a period, so I know Premier Bet quite well. I was the CEO for online at Premier Bet for a period, so I know Premier Bet well. So Premier Bet has been there a good long time. They're established with retail across Malawi, and they have a decent online operation. Betway has a very strong commitment to this market, a leadership position in this market. It's built off online for Betway, let's be clear on that. However, Betway do have, a smattering of stores across Malawi, and they do those very well, more like experience centers than anything else, right? So look, Malawi is a very interesting market. I think what I'm hearing is there are more operators on the way. I believe that Elephant Bet, by the time this goes out, I believe that Elephant Bet will be live in the market. I say again, Elephant Bet is an amazing operator. They operate in Angola, where they're leader. They compete with us in Mozambique, where they're number 2, and they have other operations like DR Congo, where they're focused, and now Malawi, where they're focused. So look, I think they're a very credible new operator that will come into Malawi and help to grow it. I said to you at the start, Charlie, it's interesting, we like light enough competition in a market, right? However, if there's no competition, you don't get the pace of change. So for example, if and I don't want to put them off, if Betway is spending $1 in a marketplace, they will grow some of the market for themselves, but they'll also grow some of the market for us. Okay, and vice versa, by the way, vice versa. So look, we welcome an appropriate level of competition, and we welcome the right kind of competitors in the mix. The right kind of competitors are Betway, are Bet Power, definitely Elephant Bet. Credit to them. I think there's one or two under there who are good operators as well. But those would be the two standout mega groups, and then the best of the rest would be Elephant. Hollywood Bets is very good as well. Okay, they're in South Africa and Mozambique. They would stand out. And then you got some kind of one market, two market heroes like a Bongo Bongo. We think Bowler Bet does some really nice stuff in Zambia. So look, the competition is good, but not too much. And Malawi's in that nice space where it's got the Betways, it's got the Premier Bets, it's got us more recently as a new enough operator, last 12 months really. And then, as I say, if Elephant's going there or one or two others going in there, if it had 6 or 7 operators 12 months from now, all spending in the market, buying advertising space, investing in local media and local events, sponsorships, ambassadors, influencers, and the rest, and maybe even some shops or experience stores. I think Malawi's total iGaming revenue and participation will grow on the back of more operators being there. So we welcome more operators coming, and we're very excited to see how Malawi can change and position itself. We have seen some really good numbers in there for our beginning. So we've been there, as I say, probably, if you think from the start of this year, really, we've been doing a decent amount of marketing in the marketplace. We're growing very strongly month on month, and we're really well positioned. So we're not quite at the levels of performance of Premier Bet in Malawi or Betway in Malawi, but they've been there a lot longer than us, okay? We're rapidly growing and with ambitions to catch them, like we've got ambitions to catch others in other markets. But yeah, we're very much on the road to podium in Malawi for sure. Yeah.
Fascinating. Christopher, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been really interesting. There's something for everyone to take away from this. As we've said, there are challenges, but Africa is only heading in one direction. Things are going to grow. It's a fascinating region for us, for the industry as a whole, to be looking at. And we really appreciate your expert insights. We look forward to seeing you and hearing from you in Lisbon. And the Road to Lisbon series will continue as we build up to the summit in September. Until then, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you on another episode of iGaming Daily.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.